Hi all, happy Monday. Welcome to the Wife of Caesar. As you know, the Wife of Caesar is Striner's project to talk about corruption or anti-corruption using everyday words so that we can fight corruption in our day-to-day lives with a little bit more than just good intentions. Now, as in every show, we have a piece of news, a case, and a typology. And today's news has to deal with President Trump and Secretary Mark Esper. Now, Mark Esper, Mr. Esper, is the Secretary of Defense of the United States. And he has been in the news the last couple of days because he publicly stated that the Pentagon and the military and intelligence services of the U.S. have no actual knowledge of an impending attack on embassies of the U.S. Now, let's back up a little bit. What happened here is, as you know, you probably are aware that the U.S. Somewhat attacked Iran. U.S. military and intelligence services decided to, under the directions of President Trump, attacked and killed General Soleimani, the top general in the Iran armed forces. And they did so, again, under the order of President Trump, citing an imminent threat of attacks by Soleimani on at least four embassies of the U.S. around the world, which would have been tragic, catastrophic, and would have been a terrible situation. However, it seems now that President Trump was embellishing his information because, again, Mr. Esper very clearly and vehemently contradicted the statements of Mr. Trump by saying explicitly that there was no actionable or credible intel that these attacks on four embassies were imminent or were even going to happen. Again, it also bears saying that when journalists asked Mr. Esper whether or not President Trump was exaggerating his reasons for attacking Soleimani, Mr. Esper directly said, "No, I don't believe he did." So that bears saying. However, this is a very embarrassing position for President Donald Trump because even though I think the entire world feels that this attack on Iran and on Iranian armed forces might be questionable. And obviously some people are in favor and some people are against. That's all well and good. However, this is a clear misuse of information. If these statements by Mr. Esper are true, then it means that, well, President Trump was actually over-justifying his actions in Iran. And it comes as no surprise to everyone that this happens in the context where President Trump is in the midst of an impeachment process, which again, he has asked that Congress suspend for the time being because there are bigger things to worry about, namely Iran. So again, this comes as no surprise to anyone, but it is very evident that now after Mr. Esper's statements, it becomes very clear what the improper benefit was. We all know what the position of entrusted power is that Mr. Trump holds, and now it becomes clear what the abuse was. Okay, moving on. As you know, in 2019, Transparency International turned 25, and they released a list of the 25 most iconic cases of corruption. We are doing our own little rundown of that list. Today, we have a favorite of ours. We will talk about the Lava Jato case. Now, this is not the first time we've talked about this, and it probably won't be the last, but again, we will give you a brief summary of what happened. As you must know, Lava Jato is very closely related to the Odebrecht scandal in Brazil and pretty much the rest of America. What happened there was that several public officials in Brazil and who worked for the Brazilian government or for a Brazilian state-owned entity. A state-owned entity is just a company whose owner is the government and whose profits go to the government. Several of these officials were involved in a scheme of corruption, bribery, and money laundering, and this scheme or the investigations led to literally a car wash. The words Lava Jato mean in Brazilian Portuguese mean car wash. Now, these investigations led to them because apparently they were receiving improper payments in the form of cars. When investigators, purely at this stage, they were purely administrative investigators, started pulling on this thread, they realized that this scheme reached higher than they expected, and they realized that several public officials, high-ranking public officials, were involved. And the results were that these officials were involved in granting public contracts to different companies in exchange for improper payments. One of these companies was Brazilian giant Odebrecht. Now, Odebrecht is a company based out of Brazil and which specializes in public works. They are contractors for the government in different countries. So essentially, the government gives them money, and they in turn give back roads, hydraulic works, infrastructure, things like that. Now, winning these contracts and the way Odebrecht won these contracts is what came under investigation. It turned out that this company, along with a bunch of others, were funneling funds to Brazilian and to public officials in all of Latin America, essentially all of the countries in Latin America, and they even were involved in the U.S., not in the same capacity, but they did touch the U.S. legal system, and they were investigated in every single country in Latin America, except, of course, Venezuela and Mexico. Who knows why? Now, and eventually this investigation, or the investigation by Brazilian authorities, led to international operations, both in Switzerland and in the U.S. Now, this led to a major task force, or a de facto task force composed by prosecutors from Brazil, from the U.S., and from Switzerland. And they were all working together, collaborating to gather intelligence and information as to the dealings of Odebrecht and to build cases against the company in the different countries. These cases led to the apprehension of Marcelo Odebrecht, who was the owner and the CEO of Odebrecht in Brazil. And he actually went to the U.S. and appeared before the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice, where he told them pretty much everything in exchange for some leniency. That doesn't mean that he was exonerated from his crimes. That means that he and his company merely had to pay a lower fine, well, relatively lower. After the information that was received by the DOJ and the Securities and Exchange Commission, they shared that information with Brazilian prosecutors and the Swiss prosecutors, and the main investigation and the main prosecution of Odebrecht took place in Brazil, but it was a shared interest among these three countries. Now, they in turn they shared all the information resulting from these investigations with authorities from all of the countries in Latin America in exchange for an agreement whereby the authorities of the other countries would have to agree that the main investigation would happen in Brazil, but that they could carry out secondary investigations in their countries. This apparently was unacceptable to two countries, Venezuela and Mexico, who decided simply not to prosecute because it's probably not that big a deal. Let's trust them. Let's believe in them. Now, today, several people have been indicted. A lot of people have been sentenced. Different companies, different people in different countries were brought to justice, and through these negotiations, Odebrecht was able to remain in business. However, if they had not cooperated, maybe the authorities would have had enough tools to simply liquidate the company. This case is very important because of its magnitude. Yeah, because of apparently Odebrecht, over the course of the entire investigation, they spent about $1 billion in bribes to obtain about $4.6 billion in profits. So it's a huge investigation. But the most important part was that Brazilian legislation concerning bribery and corruption is not that sophisticated. It's not bad law. It's just not it doesn't provide prosecutors with very sophisticated tools. However, because Brazil had very eager judges and very tenacious prosecutors, they were able to use whatever tools they had at their disposal to really bring this company to justice. So it's a great case of what you can do when you have capable people who are driven and who have a purpose. Okay, let's move on to the typology. Today we get to talk about Hawala. And Hawala is a typology for money laundering. Now, money laundering, you might remember, is taking money that comes from crime, from illegal enterprises, and passing it off as clean money. Thus, the term laundering. You clean it, you bleach it. The way you do that is through several steps, but the main goal of laundering money is to take your dirty money and put it into the legal financial system. Why? So that these drug dealers and corrupt leaders can use it in regular stores and use regular credit cards and buy homes and use it as if they were regular people, which they are not. Now, Hawala is a very, very old system originating in the Middle East. Now, this system is sort of like a parallel financial system for transferring information and transferring funds. You might, if you want to send money to someone in a different country, what you would do as a regular person is you reach out to your bank and you make an international wire, and that's it. You get charged a commission and you pay taxes on that transmission or on that transfer, and that's pretty much it. However, a lot of people, again, 1,000-year-old system, and it implicates a lot of people that are simply do not have access to the traditional banking system. So let's say that you have person A and she wants to send money to person B in a different country. However, she cannot, for legal reasons, maybe because she doesn't have access to financial services, or maybe because sending that money over would be illegal. I'll give you an example. You cannot send money from the US to South Sudan. You cannot do it. It's illegal because of sanctions. Now, because A cannot get money to B directly, what they do is they reach out to third parties. Let's call this person X and this person Y. So A would reach out to X and give the money to her, and X would transfer the money to Y, and Y would transfer the money to B. So it seems more intricate, but again, it's the simplest way of doing it without entering into the banking system. And it might, even though it seems more complex, it's sometimes easier, faster, and cheaper than using traditional financial services, because the fees that banks charge are for the most part more expensive or higher than what you might be charged by a hawalader. A hawalader is, in this case, X and Y, the people who engage in hawala. Now, the commissions are cheaper and the process is much simpler. So it's sometimes taken care of by a simple phone call, and the hawalader X even might visit person A at her home, transfer the funds to hawalader Y, and hawalader Y might transfer the funds and give the funds directly to person B at her home. So it's much simpler, much faster, and much more practical than using a traditional bank. Now, although it might not seem like it, it's a very sophisticated system, and it's very effective because there is literally no paper trail. Hawaladers tend to memorize these transactions. Because traveling with paper trails or records of illegal financial services is extremely dangerous because it's illegal, they have to rely on their memory. So they know how much money has to go to whom in each different place. So it requires quite a bit of skill, but they are obviously used to it. This system can also be used to transfer information, and it has been abused, even though it might seem to be a system rooted in tradition and cultural social systems or social functions. It is a system that is often abused for money laundering and for transferring intelligence that might turn into terrorist acts, because it's not regulated and they don't have any record of the transfers of money or of information. Any person who is trying to do something wrong, trying to hurt people, or trying to abuse the financial system or launder money, or any other of that lovely stuff, would have it very easy, or would find it very easy to use hawala to transfer these illicit funds, or to share sensitive intelligence with terrorist organizations. So hawala is largely frowned upon by the Western and modern financial systems, because even though it was very useful and sophisticated 1,000 years ago, today it's mostly abused for illicit acts. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you for joining us. This, again, was The Wife of Caesar, and I will leave you with this. Please blow the whistle, denounce corruption, but do so safely. If you're not sure whether or not what you're looking at is corruption, or you're not sure that you're entirely safe, don't do anything. Reach out to someone who might help you. Feel free to reach out to us at info@stranded.mx, and we will be glad to help you. But above all, please stay safe. This was The Wife of Caesar. My name is Michele Bien, or Michele Bien. Either is fine. And you have a happy Monday.